Two very different artists, one shared tool. Yoji Shinkawa shapes futuristic worlds with motion and atmosphere, as seen in his game art of Metal Gear Solid. Takehiko Inoue captures history and emotion with raw, expressive detail in his manga, Vagabond. Both rely on the ink brush to translate their artistic style and vision onto the canvas. I don't think my drawing skills are that good. What matters more are the ideas, the ones that enrich the game. And when I use brush pens, it all comes naturally. I can draw in a more open, relaxed way. When we break down and analyze Yoji Shinkawa's artworks, his key trait is how he draws the eyes. And to him, drawing them in a normal way isn't challenging enough. He tends to paint with an ever-changing variety of strokes in the iris and pupils and connect them to the edges. Also, more often than not, he uses strong eyelashes, like big chunks that move outwards. Of course, this does depend on the distance. For close-up full portrait art, he naturally adds way more detail compared to far-away body shots, whereas in the latter, he tends to block out the whole segment. When compare the eyes and focus on both sides, we see there is a deliberate asymmetric difference. He pulls it off so convincingly in his design, composition and ink strokes. His main tool are normal brushes for large art and a black ink brush, which have a soft tip for normal-sized illustrations. They allow me to create the kind of lines I visualize in my head. You often see people say that when you draw manga, you should use Kabura pens. I find those too hard to use though. When I use brush pens though, I don't have to worry as much about single lines, and I can draw in a more open way. His approach comes from sumi-e, a traditional Japanese method aimed at capturing the essence of a subject. Shinkawa applies that mindset in his own work. Every stroke is intentional, even in his rough sketches. Remove small sections of his lines and the entire composition loses structure fast. They're not random, not even close. We can see it in the way he starts or ends strokes with sharp thick to thin transitions. For lighter marks, he uses minimal pressure, less ink, or dilutes the brush with water. The more diluted the ink, the lighter the tone, the less ink, the more transparent the stroke. He sometimes taps the brush lightly to create a dotted texture. For most characters, he combines wavy lines with occasional sharp angular strokes. To push the gesture, he thickens lines in areas that come forward in depth. Although he treats this more as a guideline than a rule, and breaks it whenever it benefits the design. He also uses white paint sparingly as a finishing touch, often to lift details like eyes or strands of hair without overpowering the rest of the piece. Shinkawa's shadow work is another defining trait. He flips the traditional roles of black and white, especially in hair, and often places solid black shapes in the background to balance the composition. His control over contrast, heavy blacks against soft edges and gray transitions, adds a deliberate asymmetry to his art. Over the years his style evolved. He incorporates more digital tools to finish pieces, adding selective color and experimenting more with value shifts. Most of his color work is done digitally, not all, but the majority. And he's become quite skilled at integrating color subtly into his heavy ink foundations. In the end, the strength of his style comes from how he uses lines and shadows to convey tension and form. The darks don't just support highlights. They establish the entire emotion and structure of the image. Shinkawa is a strong character designer, and Kojima labeled his portfolio as S-tier before hiring him. His style fits naturally with the futuristic genres he works in. Still, he mentioned he'd personally prefer drawing mostly mecha, and that motion is always central in his design choices. He explained it like this: I always keep in mind how a character should move in the game. If I don't, it might be impossible to move the end product. And when talking about Zone of the Enders, he added, along with its motion, I kept in mind the blood vessel lines on the surface. That's something extra that makes the character look interesting. He helped make Snake iconic through simple choices. His cast looks diverse, but still shares a unified style. He even made Otacon look cool, which says enough. He summed up his approach clearly. What matters more for an art director is the quality of your ideas, whether it's robots or characters. The point is how many interesting ideas you can infuse into the design. Ideas tied to the game itself, that enrich the gameplay. And finally, it's not about one awesome drawing, it's whether, once the design is in the game, it motivates and inspires the player. If Shinkawa paints ideas into motion, then Inoue turns ink into life, and he uses the exact same weapon. the ink brush. He doesn't work in a team. His philosophy is more personal, more internal, shaped for his readers. I believe that up until now I've managed to maintain a kind of stylistic purity by doing the work all by myself, even if it meant the quality of the work might suffer for it. But lately I've been trying to use other people's ideas and create my work using them. When we break down and analyze Takehiko Inoue's art style, it is clear that he evolved through the years, increasing the realism every step of the way in his own creative journey. When asked about this transformation, he said, "I get bored very easily, and so it'd be very painful to continue to draw the same drawings for such a long time. But there are things that I drew then, like how I felt when I was drawing it, or the passion I had at that time, that art expresses well, so if I had the opportunity to draw it over again, I wouldn't do it." And while his personal dedication to his art is to challenge his creative spirit, his mantra, "The eye is really the most important. Here is where the character comes alive," holds true to the core of his artworks. He uses elements such as tear ducts, eyelids, a very faint amount of catchlights, darker circles under the eyes, a gentle use of eyelashes, and added depth in the eyebrows. In exchange for a bit of realism, he makes his expressions extra striking by emphasizing the outline around the eye. In simple terms, Inoue knows how much line intensity is needed for every panel to make the eyes the focal point without being distracting. Furthermore, to increase realism, he draws relatively large noses, emphasized with nostrils and shadows. The mouth is drawn with full contour, strongly expressing the lips. He adds facial hair by drawing them with rough light strokes, which is still compacted enough to make it convincing. This method is also strengthened by really emphasizing the direction of hair, making beards and eyebrows seamlessly blend in with the face. More often than not, he adds details like scars, blood and strong shadows, which all add to contrast, emphasizing the form. So what about the hair? Well, Inoue said, "The hair is the fun part, there are no rules for it." He creates depth through sporadic highlights, increasing contrast and giving the impression of individual hair strands flowing in distinct chunks. Some strands cling to the face like beads of sweat, while others sway gently in the wind. He said that his art style was influenced by Shinju Mizushima, who did Dokuben, Ryoichi Ikegami, who drew Otokogumi, and last but not least, Makoto Kobayashi, who did the pro wrestling manga Ichini no Sanshiro. When we inspect Takehiko Inoue art tools, he started off with an ink pen, and while it's popular among mangaka, the hardness, the gritty lines and sharp strokes didn't suit him. He said that he switched to an ink brush pen at volume 14 of Vagabond. It was difficult at first, tough even, because he was getting quite a backlash from his fans. However, he noted that he adopted his line art to the softness of the brush, using low pressure at varying intensities to make the lines more expressive. "I wanted to make my art more dirtier, unsophisticated, and opted for an ink brush to add more warmth in the lines." He also noted that it gave him more freedom once he got used to it. Moreover, he did indicate that his style very similar to sumi-e, capturing the spirit of the object, which reminds me of, you guessed it, Yoji Shinkawa. The interesting effect is that a brush adds a bit of randomness to his line work, which he personally commented that it made the art feel more alive. In addition, to block out the black ink or add highlights, he uses those white stinky correction fluids to do the job. Also, it's important to note that this brush is small-sized, as he explained that a big brush is nearly impossible to get the same effect. That said, one size doesn't fit all, because like the true artist Inoue also did massive painting projects. For his mangas, he uses paper to remove excessive ink and to avoid smudges. Also, he draws in a smooth, speedy way, but still takes the patience for elongated lines, doing them in 2 swift swoops. Takehiko Inoue treats his manga panels like a painter does a canvas, prioritizing precision over speed. He aims high with each masterpiece, always striving to outdo himself. In his own words, every panel is an opportunity to showcase his creativity, employing diverse styles and techniques to convey his messages effectively. A key aspect of Inoue's style is his adept use of contrast, skillfully utilizing black and white for maximum impact. Everything is detailed, certainly the backgrounds. For example, Inoue's integration of nature photography into his manga adds depth and the contemplative atmosphere to the scenes. For the characters, the details include wrinkles in kimonos. Despite that these clothes do not easily fold, he does add them to make his art more interesting. Inoue also noted that he draws most from imagination, even admitting that he changes the weapons slightly each time he draws. Despite his dedication, he acknowledges that his high standards takes a toll on his creativity. Breaks often result in stiffness upon return, leading to discarded work as he strives to regain his edge. And for any inspiring artist, while Inoue did pre-art school, he dropped out of university after a few days, because he didn't like the way they forced the students to draw. To quote him, "I don't think you need formal training to draw manga. Technique itself is not as important, but developing your own style is." I'm light novel author GP Vugs, and honestly, both Shinkawa and Inoue couldn't be more different. Yet they work with the same humble tool, the ink brush. It's like music. Give the same instrument to two composers and you'll never hear the same song twice. And that's the point. Style is something each of us already carries.